Croeso, this is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with the first video for a little while. To cut a long story short, I've not been a well man, not been able to do a great deal of anything, but hopefully on the mend and on the way to becoming a less not a well man. So, I am back. For the first video back, I thought I'd do a little bit more quiet thunder. A while back, I did a video of me reading a portion of the prologue, which is from the antagonist's point of view. So I thought I'd do a section of chapter 1, which is from the protagonist's point of view, which is Carian. So you'll have to forgive me if I'm not up to my usual beautifully eloquent self. This is my first video for a while, so do bear with me. Quiet Thunder by, shockingly enough, J.P. Harker. Let's have a look. Chapter 1, The Big House. No matter how often she saw them, Carian could never get used to crucifixions. This man was dead now, God be thanked, but that hadn't been true for all of them. On the long ride from Danham, Carian and Moylin had passed 4 other crosses set up on the roadside, and 3 of them had borne men who were still very much alive. Their smell alone, the foul stench of blood and waste, had been enough to make Carian gag, and the sight had made her want to weep for them. Too exhausted to scream any more, they had moaned and pleaded to be let down, or for the simple mercy of a cup of water or a sword in the heart. The sight of them, their naked flesh scourged, their arms and feet pierced with iron nails, and hot tears running freely down their cheeks, had made Carian wish she could have done as they asked. But it was death to interfere with Gaian justice, and so each time she had looked away, scared and ashamed. After each cross they passed, Carian had put a hand to the amulet under her yellow dress, sending a quiet prayer to Sulis that the men's pain would be over soon. She had shed tears with every prayer. True, these men were criminals, likely thieves, murderers, or even rapists, and no doubt they had earned their fate by terrible deeds. All the same, such torment was no easy thing to see. Let them cross the bridge soon, and their crimes be judged by the gods. She touched the sapphire, said her prayer, then clenched her fist tight on Glau's reins, forcing herself to focus on the road ahead. It was long and straight, passing through the green fields and low hills of Catuban land. Belanos shone down on it from a clear blue sky, and when Carian took in a long breath, the air of her homeland smelled clean and fresh. With the wind coming from the north, it's as if we didn't just pass a rotting corpse at all. Carian took another breath, and tried to think only of the beauty of her home, and forget about the bloody men hung up to die in agony. A gust of the blessed north wind blew into her face, and she pushed a strand of yellow hair out of her eyes. She wondered briefly if the gust had come straight from the gods, whether they were welcoming her home or scolding her for ignoring the dying men. The mother goddess loved mercy, and would have wanted her to be kind to them, crime or no crime. But then, what could I have done? She shoved the guilty thought aside, and subtly drove a knuckle into her palm. Moylin, riding beside her, noticed the movement and mistook its purpose. Fortune should be with us, Carian. Danham is well behind us now, and I'll lay odds he was the last we shall see. He touched a hand to his chest. May he cross the bridge unharmed. Carian had already said the prayer, but she copied Moylin's gesture and touched her heart. They might be criminals, and their bridge to the other world might be narrow as a result. But after what they'd suffered in punishment, she hoped Anon would show them pity. Moylin didn't nod, but she knew that he approved, and that he was probably right about this wretch being the last one they saw. Her father's steward and closest friend was a middle-sized, middle-aged man with a wide nose and a bushy, fox-red moustache. He'd been running the estate since before Carian was born, and was probably the cleverest man she knew. His knowledge of crops and livestock was matched only by his genius with numbers, and he had more than his fair share of worldly wisdom to go with it. If I'm ever half the steward he is, I'll be doing well. Carian nodded quietly as they rode on, still thinking about the man on the cross. She tried to remind herself that it was thanks to the iron law of the Gaians that serious crimes were so rare in Catuvan land. For all their harsh methods, the Gaians kept the tribes under their rulership safe from dangers both within and without. It was the best any of them could hope for, and like every other Catuvan, Carian was glad of the peace the Empire provided. But it was always hard to see the price of that peace being paid. She ran a hand down Glau's mane, taking comfort in the softness of the pony's chestnut hair, and spoke without looking up at Moylin. "I pray, Cassio, you're right." She shuddered. "I've seen enough of these poor creatures to last a lifetime." She'd used the Gaian name for the mother goddess, purely because they'd been speaking in Vulgare, the Gaian tongue. In Lurian she might have said Cassio Mana, but it wasn't important. It was important to practice her Vulgare, and besides, it didn't really matter. A god wouldn't get confused by worshippers using different names. Moylin nodded and replied, his Vulgare both cleaner and crisper than hers. "I confess, I never grow used to seeing these things either." He sighed, his great moustache drooping a little. "I still remember the day they nailed up poor Kentin's father. The sight of it has never left me." Carian felt a little pang in her heart. Kentin's father had been a thief, and had earned his fate the same as any lawbreaker, but Kentin hadn't deserved to see such a horror so young. It had been kind of Carian's own father to take him in afterwards, and she took some comfort that Kentin had made a good life for himself in Green Rise. At 19 summers he was only a little older than Carian, but he'd already shown himself to be a good worker, and as solid a man as any on the estate. Carian was pleased for him. She sighed and almost smiled, glad to have found something good to think of after all she'd seen. Soon enough we'll be home and happy, and all these dead men will be far behind us. They rode quietly for a few paces until Moylin broke the silence. "How well do you think it went?" He'd put a little forced cheer into his voice, but the question was real, and Carian thought carefully before she answered. This had been her first trip to Danum, where she'd been given real control over negotiations, with Moylin only serving to advise her. By rights it ought to have been Lydian learning all of this, of course. She was the older sister. But Lydian had no head for numbers, and the moment Carian had shown aptitude for it, their father had started teaching her the business. Lydian might be the one who would inherit the house and fields, but it was clear to all it would be Carian who ran the estate. She spoke slowly. "Father will be glad of the deal we struck for the herd, and I was right not to take Aaron's offer for the fleeces." She paused, brushing an imaginary crease from her dress. "Wasn't I?" Moylin nodded. "You were. He'd have cheated us something fierce, no doubt. In a moon's turn, he'll be begging us to sell up our asking price." Carian smiled, glad that she'd made the right choice. Moylin reached into his saddlebag and drew out the little sack of dried dates he'd brought in the town. He took one for himself and tossed another to Carian. "And the Legion grain?" Carian caught the date and chewed. The dried fruit was deliciously sweet. "We did as well as we could hope to, though I still say we should have haggled." Moylin snorted at that, and he was probably right too. Though her father's farm made good deals with local traders, most of their income came from selling grain to the Blackbird Legion, which was ever a two-edged sword. The Gaians always got the best of any deal. Carian had gained a decent price for the supply to the Danum cohort, but she'd been swindled on the amount set to the watchtowers. "The money is regular. Even when they cheat us, they always pay on time." It was cold comfort. Carian let out a sigh, and Moylin smiled at her. "Forget it. Even accounting for Lucullus's greed, it's been more than a fair trip." He paused. "Well done." He offered her another date, and Carian took it without quite looking at him. Compliments always left her embarrassed, and she covered the awkwardness with a jest. "Thank you. When I'm running the big house, I'll do my best to still find work for you." Moylin threw the date straight at her nose, but Carian caught it, and grinned before tossing it up and catching it in her mouth. The steward shook his head but kept smiling. "Sometimes, my girl, you are too clever for your own good." Carian didn't reply. She just smiled and chewed, enjoying the sweet taste of the date, and the sweeter knowledge that she would soon be home, with a proud father waiting for her. So that's the first part of part 1. It's not as blood and guts as the prologue was, but sometimes one has to not have blood and guts in order to have a story. I may do the second half of Chapter 1 in a future video. We'll see. See if people like it. We'll see if I have the time and energy. But that was the first part of Chapter 1, Quiet Thunder. Go out, buy it, read it, tell everyone you know. It's brilliant. Pass on the word. I shall leave it at that then, for now. Hopefully I'll be able to get some more videos out a little bit more regularly, now that I'm a bit better, and I will see you in the next one. So, this is James, aka JP Harker. Will out.